Marquee. The Indian wrestling market is something that both WWE and TNA were desperate to tap into, and WWE still is today. The Indian people love their professional wrestling, and it's a ginormous country with a population of 1.35 billion, so it only makes sense that a wrestling company would like to profit from the Indian market. So today we'll be travelling back to 2012 when TNA decided to make a serious attempt to run a second TV programme over in India, and this is how Ring Ka King was born. The programme would be an action-packed 45 minutes of wrestling, and it would be broadcast on the Colours TV network, which is owned by Viacom. Great, so that means this video is going to get taken down as well then. Most of the wrestlers on this show are either signed to TNA or they're American indie wrestlers. There's also lots of unknown Indian wrestlers on this show who received training at OVW before this show took place, so we're going to see how they get on as well. The most exciting thing about this show is that from the 4 episodes I've watched so far, it seems that Scott Steiner is the main heel on the show. That's it, I'm sold already. I get the feeling this video might attract a few new people, so I just want to give a little shout out to those people. If you're new around the channel and you've just found my video, I'm just going to pre-warn you. Try not to get too upset or angry over anything I say. We have a little saying around here, it's called no offence. I'm not a genie in a bottle and I'm not going to rub you the right way. In fact, quite often, I rub people the complete wrong way, and then I end up having to say shut up or I'll smack you one. So the show starts out with a really long dancing and singing performance from an Indian R&B musical artist called Micah Singh. I've never heard of him before, but he seems to be quite popular with the audience. The set here looks really nice, it's bright and flashy, it's exactly what you would expect to see from an Indian show. In fact, it looks a lot nicer than the Impact Zone. They even have their own Nitro girls, although they're not quite as provocative. You know what, I'm quite pumped for this show. Let's see what Ring Ka King's got to offer. So the very first wrestler we see is Chavo Guerrero. As usual, he says he's here to be the world champion, just like he does every time he goes to a new company. In fact, there's a whole host of wrestlers that you'll recognise from American wrestling programmes. Eugene is here playing a wrestler called Dr. Nick Dinsmore. His gimmick is like something that you would expect to see in the early 90s. Dead cheesy and stupid. Sir Brutus Magnus, Scott Steiner, Matt Morgan, Sonjay Dutt, and there's also Mahabali Veera. There's going to be an 8-man tournament to crown the first ever Ring Ka King World Champion. For some reason they say that Matt Morgan is the favourite, although he's never actually been a World Champion anywhere before. Mahabali Veera wins his first match, and he seems to be the crowd favourite here. They're billing him as the Indian Superman. It may only be the first show, but there's already a heel faction. Brutus Magnus, Steiner and Sonjay Dutt are a faction for some reason. Magnus tries to be the serious talker of the group, but Steiner's already the highlight of the show for me.
You're gonna kill Morgan! You go out there and destroy him! You hear that? Yeah. Destroy him! Come on, Magnus!
Chris Adonis, aka Chris Masters, is also on the show. He's putting up a load of Indian rupees for audience members to come and try and break his Adonis lock. I have to say he looks in a lot more impressive shape than when he turned up in TNA a few years later. Matt Morgan beat Magnus with the carbon footprint in a tournament matchup which ends the first episode of Ring Ka King, and at the end of the show there's a face-off with the Hills squaring off with Morgan and Shearer. Sonjay Dutt squaring up to them looks a bit silly really. He's tiny. This tournament is going to continue over the course of the next 3 episodes, ending in the crowning of the first ever Ring Ka King World Champion. Throughout these shows they keep showing this big guy who's an enforcer for the commissioner, and it turns out he's in NXT nowadays teaming with Rinku Singh. I'm not going to try and pronounce his name because I can't, no offence, but that's pretty cool. It's quite fun to see what stars have come out of a 2012 Indian wrestling show that was put on by TNA. I expect to see a few more familiar faces as this video progresses. Chavo Guerrero comes out and talks about Eddie, just like he normally does, and says that he'll be the first Ring Ka King champion. Hopefully not. He's then interrupted by a team called the Sheiks. One of them is Sheikh Abdul Bashir. They attack Chavo because they're not very nice guys, I guess. Can't see any other reason than that. Disclaimer, I only speak passable Hindi, so I only know a little bit about what's going on this show. There's no subtitles either. But this is still watchable for me because there's a lot of promos cut in English still. Backstage, Magnus is talking about the boss and tells Steiner and Sonjay that they have to win their matches. Steiner flips out backstage and I have no idea what he says. Magnus looks terrified. Sonjay isn't speaking English in any of his promos, so his partners just look confused. It's weird seeing him as a heel here, you'd think he'd have been a babyface. Next up, Scott Steiner takes on a wrestler called Max B, who has a UFC gimmick. Steiner is going nuts at the crowd and spits at them during the match. He's literally destroying this kid as well. This is my favourite matchup on Ring Ka King so far. It's just Steiner throwing this jobber around. I have to mention this flatliner he hits from the top rope. It looks like he kills this kid. He then taps the kid out with the Steiner recliner. Scott continues to attack the kid after the show and puts him in the recliner but won't let go, and he keeps screaming at everybody. This is like WCW all over again. During the break, Steiner attacks the kid on the stretcher and then he suplexes him from the top. Man, we didn't get Steiner acting like this in TNA. This is awesome. It's just like his Roid Rage gimmick in WCW. Talking of flipping out, the Sheiks are backstage complaining about something, but I don't know what they're talking about. Because Abdul Bashir speaks so many languages, I don't know which one he's actually doing here, but it's not English, that's for sure. For anyone who's watched Ring Ka King, the Mumbai Cats are probably one of the most infamous teams to come out of the show, and they'll be taking on the Sheiks next. For some reason, the Sheiks have Raisha Saeed with them, so we continue to see all the TNA talents that they didn't have anything better to do turn up on this show. The Sheiks go on to have the best wrestling match of Ring Ka King so far. I love their double team moves, especially their finisher. They worked a great old school heel matchup here, and the crowd loved the Mumbai Cats. I'm not going to pretend that I understand the Hindi culture too much, but the fans did love the Mumbai Cats, and the gimmick might seem a bit bizarre to anyone who's watching this from outside India. It might even seem silly to some, but listen, we were not the target audience for this show, so it doesn't really matter what we think, as long as the fans are entertained. Anyway, the Mumbai Cats lose after the Sheiks do a double team from the top rope. Backstage, a team called the Bollywood Boys are being interviewed. Okay, I just had to look it up. Both of these guys are actually from Canada, and they're currently signed to WWE, so that's another good thing that's already come out of this show. Next up, Sanjay Dutt and Chavo fight in another tournament match. In a surprising twist, Chavo Guerrero actually loses the match to Sanjay Dutt after the Sheiks run out and distract him. It's quite hilarious. Everywhere Chavo Guerrero goes, he talks a big game and then instantly fails. The show ends with Magnus talking to the boss on the phone again. It sounds like the aim of this tournament is to have a Steiner versus Sanjay Dutt final, as whoever the boss is, he or she wants them to be able to control Ring Ka King. This storyline continues into the next show, and it's lots of talk about the boss. Scott Steiner calls the Indian wrestlers a bunch of white trash in a particular highlight of the show.
You understand what he's saying, white trash? You made a big mistake!
In fact, this show would be particularly notable for Scott Steiner. He comes out to the ring in a rage. I mean, seriously, look at him. I don't know what wound him up so much before this match, but he looks scary. I've watched this footage back time and time again. I read some people say that the fans spat at Scott Steiner, but honestly I can't see any sign of that. Steiner turns into a raging bull trying to get at the fans. He tries to get over the barrier and he has one fan around the neck. He's basically crushing him. He starts screaming at Magnus and the referee. Nobody can control him here. It looks like they've moved him along, but then he turns on some more fans and starts trying to get at them as well. Magnus looks absolutely terrified here. I bet he's thinking, what have I got myself in for? I don't know what set off Scott here. All I can see is a fan pointing at him on the way to the ring. I mean, let me know down below, do you think that incident was real or fake? I don't see how that many fans can be plants in the audience. It seemed like everyone in the audience was terrified. Regardless of what happened with Scotty then, he's taking on Mahabali Vera next in another tournament match, and I would not like to be Vera with the mood that Scott Steiner seems to be in. Scott Steiner eventually manages to beat Mahabali Vera. I really did think Vera was being built up to be the face of the company, so it surprised me to see him lose to Steiner here. Scott Steiner is now through to the finals of the competition. This must have been Scott Steiner's final main event run in a major company, if you can call Ring Ka King that. I guess it would be going by their viewing figures. Backstage, some wrestlers are being interviewed. It's Zima Ion, Jimmy Rave and Cowboy Trevor Murdoch. Apparently they're all going to be involved in a 6-man tag match next. Jimmy Rave is just embarrassing on the mic. It's so cringy to listen to him. And Trevor Murdoch just sounds like he's reading from James Storm's playbook.
It's Jimmy Rave, and I'm ready to get this match over with so we can party! Woo! Bottom line is, I like to drink beer and fight. And when we step into the ring tonight, we're gonna kick some freaking teeth down somebody's throat. So you better lace them up tight.
The first opponent that they will be taking on is an Undertaker ripoff because they were unable to get the real Undertaker on the show. He's called Isaiah Cash. It's actually Luke Gallows, and he teams up with Joey Ryan and Nunzio here. Zima Ion lights up the ring here and he wins it for his team with the flashiest offense the Indian fans would have seen on Ring Ka King up to this point. After the match, Gallows attacks everybody and hits a choke bomb. Man, I love that move. He then cuts a promo about not messing with his colours or his bike, kind of a prelude to the Aces and Eights, as around 8 months after this he would end up in TNA as a masked biker. He then attacks his partners after the match. Chris Adonis is also continuing with his Master Lock challenge, but in typical TNA fashion, a midget randomly runs out to the crowd and gets involved, because TNA always has to involve midgets on their show. In the other semi-final tournament match, Matt Morgan beat Sonjay Dutt. Sonjay was surprisingly competitive against the much larger Matt Morgan here. The final has now been confirmed and it will be Scott Steiner taking on Matt Morgan. The Ring King fans also get to see some female wrestling action, as Mickie James beats Alyssa Flash in a highly competitive matchup. The Indian fans love Mickie James. I'm surprised TNA allowed Mickie to turn up here. Next up, there's a press conference and there's a weigh-in between Steiner and Morgan. Steiner has his biceps measured and they come out at 24.5 inches. He will not stop bringing this up for the promo. He's absolutely gushing about this. Matt Morgan's biceps weren't as big, sadly. Pretty fun little segment. I'm quite pumped for this tournament final. Backstage, the Bollywood boys announced that there's going to be a tournament to crown the first ever Ring King Tag Team Champions. I'm quite interested to see what these guys have got. Chavo Guerrero continues to feud with the Sheiks, and on this show he teams up with David Hart Smith. I was quite surprised to see the British Bulldog's son turn up on this show from 2012, as just 2 years earlier he was the Unified Tag Team Champion in WWE. He fell from grace quickly. During the match there's more rubbish with the midget. I don't know why he keeps showing up on the show, I really don't know what's going on with this. Matt Morgan and Steiner eventually clash in the main event, and it's a pretty good match. The crowd are firmly behind Morgan, and it went for a good 10 minutes. This was also the first match I'd seen where the crowd were clearly chanting an American wrestler's name throughout. Morgan eventually beat Steiner to pick up the win and become the first ever Ring King World Champion. So to all you Matt Morgan fans out there, this will be Morgan's biggest achievement in the wrestling business right here. I think it was a good choice to have Matt Morgan win the belt and become the first champion, as it starts this company off on a good point, but from a selfish point of view, man, I would have loved it if Steiner was the first ever champion. The more Steiner TV time we get, the better. So the Scott Steiner incident with the fan was fun to watch and it looked a bit crazy, but I do actually have to confess that in a later episode of Ring King, he would go one step further. He would rip at the barriers and chase the fans. This really got me thinking if this was staged or not, but how can you get so many fans involved in something like that? How could they all be plants? What an awesome spectacle to see though, all those people sprinting in terror from the raging bull that is Scott Steiner. Scott Steiner was actually signed to TNA at this point, but upon return from Ring King, he would be fired by TNA, so I guess they didn't think much of his attacking the crowd gimmick. So that's the first 4 episodes of Ring King. There were 26 episodes in total, and the wrestling is actually really good. It's basically TNA wrestling with less talking segments. Some other familiar TNA faces would turn up as the weeks went on, but unfortunately the show wasn't actually picked up for a second series, despite getting pretty good viewership. I mean, just to put this viewership stuff into perspective, the first ever episode of Ring King got 14 million viewers. That's a lot of people. That makes WWE look tiny. Anyway, I thought it would be fun to cover something different for a change. If you want me to cover the rest of Ring King, just let me know down below.
I'm the Hawk! And what you gonna do, brother, when Hawkmania is running wild on you? You're gonna subscribe, brother. Yeah, man.